This is The Wilderness and the Wellspring, the podcast companion to the newsletter of the same name, about the difficult times when you want to give up on your creative pursuits and the beauty of the act of creation. I'm your host, Jeff Lunt. This is episode 4, my interview with a creative filmmaker and a good friend of mine, Kyle Gerkin. Hey there, podcast listeners. If you like what you're hearing, and you'd like to see the show reach a broader audience, there's a couple of things you could do that would really be helpful. The first is to share the show with someone you think would find it interesting. And the other thing you could do is consider taking a few moments out of your day and leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If you decide to take time out of your day to do either of those things, I just wanted to say thank you for listening, and I really appreciate it. And now, on with the show. Welcome to the podcast. I have a longtime friend of mine here, Kyle Gerkin, who, like me, has longed for, kind of a life where we can pursue our creative passions, but we also kind of choose certain practical things, put a roof over our head, that kind of thing. And brought him on to talk a little bit about some of his creative projects and how he balances his time and how he thinks about what he might do in the future and that sort of stuff. So welcome, Kyle.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
Yeah. So I want to start out giving a little intro to some of the stuff that you've done, some of the more public stuff, or some of the creative things you're most proud of, things that come to mind, or, for example, your feature film, 7 Hours in Heaven. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so obviously, I met you many years ago in the early 2000s. We were both working for a school district as techs and computer techs, to be more specific. And that was sort of our introduction to each other. And I think even back then, we were both sort of dabbling in various creative projects. I think yours were mainly on the programming side, and I was fooling around with some little filmmaking stuff, what you could do in iMovie on the old original iMac and things of that nature. So, but yeah, I mean, obviously, as things progressed, and I got to a point in my life where I was able to have a little more freedom as my kids got a little older. I had 2 young kids at the time I met you, and as they got a little older and more independent, and I had a little more freedom, I was able to pursue filmmaking in a more serious way. And my intro to it really was through the world of acting. I signed up for a class at the Meisner Method, which have I ever told you much about, like, specifically the method I was trained in? Do you have an interest, or should I just skip on to the film here?
No, I don't think you've told me about it. Meisner Method sounds like Old Man Potter was running the class. Yeah, perhaps.
Yeah, it's named after Sanford Meisner, who was a famous acting teacher. But the basic idea of it is it's sort of a cousin to method acting, but whereas method acting, you're sort of living in the character all the time, right? Like whether you're on set or off. With Meisner, it's more limited in the sense that you're living in the character really just when you're on set. But the idea is that you do the work to create the imaginary circumstances such that you're able to the acting sort of falls away, and you're just reacting and having the emotions that person would have in that situation, right? So and it's not necessarily you essentially have to build an imaginary circumstance that's sort of adjacent to what you're doing in the scene, but not necessarily the same thing, right? So maybe the scene is about betrayal, and maybe you're being betrayed by a business partner or something in the scene, for example. So you don't have to then come up with a magic circumstance that's exactly that, but maybe from your own life, right? Like you have uh, a circumstance of betrayal that, and instead rather than drawing on a real one, right, which is what you do at sometimes I think in method and all this I'm saying is I've only trained in the one thing in Meisner, so I could be speaking. I mean, I'm probably describing Meisner wrong as well as any other acting methods. So just to put that caveat in here, but my understanding of it is that with the method, a lot of times you draw on your real life experience. So if you actually had been betrayed by somebody, you're able to sort of dredge that up and use that as the fire for your performance. Whereas with the Meisner method, you admit something imaginary, but something that is close enough that it could have happened, right? So you take, say, your real spouse, for example, and imagine that they cheated on you, and you build it out, and maybe they cheated on you with, maybe there was a circumstance with your real spouse where they were kind of flirty with someone, nothing ever happened, but at the time, it bothered you a little bit or something. So now you kind of play that out, right? It's like, well, what if so it had gone further, and what if not just they hadn't just flirted, but something had gone further, and then and they had snuck off to a motel or whatever. And you build this whole thing out in your head in a very detailed way, so that it becomes like it's real, and you start feeling the actual emotions of betrayal. And then once you get to the scene, right, that's all baked in. And then when you're having the scene and you're saying these lines, all of that's underneath it, and you can actually, you'll have, it's not a matter of acting like you're betrayed. You are feeling betrayed, right? So it's
Hmm.
so it's your genuine feelings are being are what you're expressing, right? Instead of some kind of pretend thing. So that's the general concept in a very, very quick way. I mean, it's obviously more complicated and nuanced than that, but just to give the potted version here. So anyway, I joined that class, and then through that class, I met a lot of other people that were, of course, a lot of people that are in that scene in the Phoenix film scene, Phoenix, Arizona. That is for anyone who's listening. That's where, of course, you and I both met, even though you've moved on to other pastures. But and so people were in the indie Phoenix scene. A lot of them, of course, in were in that class or different people from there. So then when I was able to uh, start connecting with those people and seeing the things they were doing outside of class, the projects they were involved in, I was able to get involved in some of those projects as well as an actor, and just seeing, just kept my eyes open, right? Saw how the sausage was made, saw how the filmmaking was done. Of course, I already had an interest in filmmaking, but seeing actual films getting made, and seeing, okay, I can do this, right? Like seeing is seeing it made me realize like there's nothing here that I'm not capable of doing. It's hard work, but if I'm willing to do the work, I could do it. So then from there, I just went on to I said, okay, let's try it. And I made a short film. Um, the first short film I made was called Foster You're Dead. It's based on a Philip K. Dick short story, which is in the public domain, and I believe that's available on YouTube if you search for it. Um, and then just went from there and started getting making more shorts. Again, sometimes I was acting and stuff. Sometimes I was directing. I typically did not like to act in anything I was directing because I wanted to be fully focused on one thing or the other. Although I sometimes had bit parts and things that I directed. Um, but and then once I had enough of that experience, I got confident enough making shorts that I felt like I was ready to tackle a feature, and so uh, yeah. So at that point, I conceived of the idea, with a friend of mine, friend uh, slash cousin-in-law, and we kind of hashed the story out between the two of us, and then I went back and wrote the script, and then we just started going through all the steps, of basically producing a film, which is a lot of pre-production. There's a lot of stuff there, and then of course, actually doing the principal photography, getting everything done, and then all the post, getting it edited and getting a finished product out in the world. So I mean, obviously it's a very quick overview of the process, but yeah, but we got it done and put it out in the world, and it's available now on Amazon. Anybody can go 7 Hours in Heaven, search for it on Amazon, and you could watch it today if you so desire.
So I want to go back to the acting for a second. So Seven
Yeah.
Hours in Heaven, your feature film, and did when you started the Meisner method and you got into that, were you thinking you would go acting, you would try acting, or like did you stumble into filmmaking? I know you've always loved film since I've known you, so you're kind of a film buff, at least amongst my friends. You're certainly like the most knowledgeable of my friends about film, I think. So was that kind of a gateway? That sounds like that's the path you were on, but was that your intention?
Well, I was at a point in my life at that juncture where I feel like I was pretty open to things, and I was, I had an interest in acting as well. Filmmaking wise, like you said, obviously I was a film buff, and you know, of course, watch a lot of films and love discussing films and all that stuff. I also had always kind of made little films ever since, when I was a little kid, right? And I got a hold of my grandparents' camera and, was making things. And then eventually we got a home camera, and just a camcorder. And of course, this was all terrible quality stuff, but, it's the storytelling, right, was there, even though, I mean, I literally didn't have editing equipment. So it was like to shoot stuff, we would have to just shoot everything in perfect sequence and then just keep going back and recording over if you didn't get like the right take until then once you had the take, then you had to shoot like the next scene and sequence from there. So it was all just, you know, just captured sequentially with no editing whatsoever. So it was pretty bad. But in any case,
So you're
like I said,
watching it like in camera right after you did it. You're not even like
right,
two tapes, two VCRs, and splicing it together. Not even that. Just
correct.
wow.
Everything in camera. Yeah. So it was definitely a high degree of difficulty, and again, the finished product was nothing to write home about. But nevertheless, I mean, it still is that of course that experience of storytelling, which is I think ultimately what really I think is going to be the underlying desire that runs through almost all my creative endeavors is the desire to tell stories, and filmmaking is just my favorite way to do that. But anyway, so I had played around with that stuff, but again, I'd never done anything what I would say serious, right? Like it was all very amateur stuff. And so then once I got into the acting scene, at which point, which I mean, again, I did have a genuine interest in acting, and acting is obviously part of filmmaking. Um, but but learning that craft was appealing to me, and I was like, who knows where it'll go, right? Like maybe I will find that I just fall in love with acting completely, and I want to dedicate myself to that. That's one possible path I was open to when I started. But as it went along, while I did really enjoy acting, I found that it was more of uh, a piece of the larger whole. I more think that I came to love acting again as how it fits into the larger filmmaking process, but also I think I also recognize like as an actor that while I don't think that I'm a bad actor, I don't think that I think my acting skill level relative to the other people in the community is lesser than my directing skill relative to the people in the community. Put it that way. I think that the at the margin, my directing has an edge over my acting. Put it that way. That makes sense.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned um, this is a period of more openness in your life. Do you remember, like, what are some other influences during that time? Other things you were exploring? Did it affect your filmmaking and your acting? Do you think? Like,
Well,
what was going on in your life at the time?
yeah. Well, I think that the more openness in my life, I think, was primarily driven by just again a greater degree of personal freedom, which was driven by a couple of things. One I'd already mentioned, which was my children, having gotten to an age where they were much more independent. I also at this time in my life was divorced. So I shared custody with the kids and only had them half the time, which of course also gave me a greater degree of personal freedom when you only uh, are responsible for the kids half the time. Um, and then on top of that, also I had gotten uh, remarried, and so with my new wife, was very supportive of me and supportive of my creative endeavors and me exploring these things. So it was a combination of all those things, I think, that allowed me to actually explore these things in a more dedicated fashion than I had been able to in the rest of my adult life up to that point. Because I had kids at a very young age, so pretty much my whole adult life I had been raising children or small children up to that point, and dealing with previous marriages and divorces and all those sorts of things. It just didn't kind of crowded out a lot of the creative
Hmm.
space.
Do you generally recommend divorce as a way to free up your time? So, kind of what you're
Yeah,
doing.
it's there's not many better ways to free up your time.
It really racked up, the responsibilities there real quick, and then you're just like, I think I'm going to cut it back to 50%. Start
Exactly.
start making films.
Yeah, it's amazing what you can do with 50% more time.
It's that's true. So, about how long do you think it was, like, when you started acting and studying it, and to when you made 7 hours?
Question. I think that I'm just sort of off the top of my head. I think it was about a year and a half till I would say till we
Oh
at
wow.
least did went to pre-production. So yeah, so relatively quick. I mean, I was I was at a point in my life at that point as well. Also, I had, I guess this is also a very important part of the story, which I neglected to mention in terms of having, freedom, degrees of freedom here, was I had stopped working full time and had gone to more of a contract basis, which also was obviously able to do because I had other income coming in from my spouse, so that allowed me to take that on, and something she was again supportive of. So given that I kind of felt like this was probably a limited window, right, where I was going to be able to do that, I really threw myself into the filmmaking, and I was I basically tried to work on as many projects as I could as quickly as possible to sort of crash course myself through everything, and just take advantage again of that window as much as possible, while it was still open.
Hmm.
And as you know, I eventually had more kids, so and the window closed pretty quickly at that point. So, in fact, my wife was pregnant with our first of our two children, my third and fourth children total. But so when we were shooting 7 hours, so it was the clock was ticking.
Yeah, I was just looking at the year it came out, and so I moved to Chicago in 2008, and I don't remember talking about the acting stuff with you when I was living there. And now I'm sort of piecing the timeline together. I was like, oh, okay. So it sounds like you started this in 2013, 2012, maybe?
Yeah, 2013-ish, I believe. Yeah.
Okay. And then you had a feature film come out in 2015. And yeah, and I remember you were at my wedding in Chicago, also my second marriage, really racking up the points there on the scoreboard. But
Yeah, we're tied right now. We'll see who gets to three first.
oh, this is supposed to be like golf, right? Like minimum score wins.
Uh,
But yeah, no, I'm just realizing actually um, I don't think I knew much about the acting stuff, because when you started doing shorts, I remember you sharing some. There was one that was in particular I remember that was filmed in, I want to say Miami, Arizona, but it was like a small.
Correct.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah, that was The Woman in Blue, also available on YouTube for those who are interested.
yeah. So that's interesting. I didn't realize I was going to learn more detail about that, because I remember you coming to my wedding in Chicago in 2013, and so that would have been kind of right after you had started almost.
Yeah, I imagine so. Again, I don't know I don't remember all the exact timelines, but yeah, it had to be close.
When you started doing shorts, what was it like to try on the sort of director's hat at first? You just figure like you're just going to try a whole bunch of stuff within filmmaking and see what you liked, or
No, I think I kind of knew that directing would. I want to say I felt like I knew it would be a natural fit, but as far as the various jobs were concerned, I think that it was the one that made the most sense for my general skill set. Um, directing is it's very much a big picture uh, project management sort of endeavor, right? So when you're directing a film and of course when you're doing independent films, low budget independent films, which is all I've ever been able to do, you're typically not just the director, you're also the producer, you're sometimes also the the AD, you're doing many of the jobs that would be done by different people on a more high-end film or a higher budget film. So so there's a lot of having to put all the pieces together, right? Pull all these different disparate threads and make sure that everything is running uh, in unison or everybody's rowing in the same direction, right? And that's something that you have to be a really good organizer. You have to be a good uh, being able to see how pieces fit together, sort of a systems integrator. And you have to be a troubleshooter. I mean, there's a lot of things that go wrong when you're making a film. There's a lot of things that you can't plan for, and it's a very fluid situation. So you have to be able to troubleshoot on the fly and figure out, okay, like, well, we can't do it that way now. Like, let's try something different. What else can we do with the resources we have on hand, right? And so, so to some degree, some of my background, I think, as in IT, but I think really any kind of corporate job where you're having to do sort of manage projects and solve problems and things like that is helpful for that and does have some translation to filmmaking. But yeah, so I think I was once I kind of saw the different roles, I felt like that was the right role for me and my skill set. And once I started doing it, I mean I do feel like it did feel natural. Like it felt right. Like when I even like the first film I did, it was like it didn't feel like I was out of my depth per se. I'm not saying it wasn't hard or that I didn't make mistakes. Of course I did, but I felt confident, I would say, that I was capable of doing this and that I could pull things together and, you know, draw this film out of, you know, the the pieces I had assembled in front of me. So I don't know if that answers your question or not. I got a bit rambly there, but
yeah, no, totally. You also did you were involved in some way with a film that featured Tom Sizemore, right? That was filmed in Arizona, featuring a steakhouse that's there, right? Some I'm forgetting what it's called.
Durants is
Durants,
the
yeah.
name of the steakhouse, and the film was Durants Never Closes, starring Tom Sizemore. Yes. Yeah, are you wanting just sort of the quick story of how that came about?
Yeah, yeah. This is
Yeah,
like one of the independent films in the Phoenix film sort of independent film community, right?
exactly. Yeah. So that, yeah, basically, how I got involved with that, and that my only real contribution to that was as an actor. I had small role, but I had a few lines and got to, work across from Sizemore in a couple of scenes. Um, but how I got involved with that film and got cast in it was there was a filmmaker in Phoenix, named Travis Mills. He's still working as a filmmaker. He's had a really interesting career. Is if you look him up, Travis Mills Running Wild Films is his production company, and he's done a bunch of stuff. But basically, at the time that I met him, he had started a project called 52 Films in 52 Weeks, and it's basically what it says on the tin. He was making 52 short films in 52 weeks, shooting them, not necessarily finishing all the post on them, but which is quite frankly an
Oh, did I lose you? Hey, Kyle, you there? Hey, there you are.
uh, yeah, for some reason it said my network connection dropped. I don't know what happened there. A little technical difficulty, but where did it drop me? Where was I at in the
You're talking about
description?
52 films in 52 weeks, and you said frankly, and I think you were going
Oh,
to say insane pace or something like that.
I said frankly, it's an insane thing to attempt,
Hmm.
uh, but nevertheless, he did, and he pulled it off. I mean, it was really quite an achievement. These were, uh, I think he raised $10,000 to do all 52 of them. So again, you can do the math there, but that's only a few $100s per film, which is incredibly, I mean, low budget. I mean, basically no budget films, and so yeah, so we did this project, and again, all these are available on YouTube, and I was able to act in several of them. But like, so his casting director. Um, I was also one of the acting coaches in the Meisner program that I was training in. And so he, of course, would, when you're making 52 films in 52 weeks, you need a lot of different actors because you can't just cast the same, six or seven people every single film. So you of course end up having quite a few roles to fill and a lot of actors. And so uh, the acting coach was able to, and his name is Michael Hanlon. By the way, he's also an actor in a lot of stuff in the local scene, and he's also featured in Durants Never Closes. But in any case, Michael was, of course, using these acting classes to try to spot talent and spot potential people that could be a good fit for various roles in the films, and often, people would get auditions out of that. He would get invited to an audition based on something he saw in class or whatever. And so that's what happened with me. And I ended up being cast in several, I think six or seven total of the 52. I don't remember precisely, but and yeah, and so that was great because I mean it was really an opportunity to hone the skills, on actual film sets, and and that was really cool opportunity that was provided for a lot of actors in Phoenix as a result of this. I mean, again, there's just not that many roles to go around typically. So when someone's making that many films in that short a time period with that many roles, that really was, I think, a boon to the whole community in terms of giving a lot of different people opportunities. But anyway, through that process, I became friends with Travis and was able to, and again, watching him was like taught me a lot of kind of how to run a film set or run at least a low budget, film set without a ton of resources, and and so and yeah, then once he kind of graduated from doing the 52 and was looking for his next big project. He had this film that he had written, his feature film, that was based on the life of basically of Jack Durant, who was a restaurateur in Phoenix who owned a sort of landmark restaurant, Durants, which is on Central in Phoenix, and is again a pretty well-known spot here for local Phoenix denizens in any case. And he had sort of a very checkered history where he had like rumored ties to the mob and the restaurant, especially in like the 60s and 70s, I think, was sort of a spot where a lot of movers and shakers from like the political scene in Phoenix would spend time and eat at. And so there's a lot to mine there in terms of kind of coming up with a interesting story about that time and place in Phoenix history through the prism of this restaurant and this particular character, Jack Durant. So yeah, so he conceived of that, and then wanted to again take his stuff to the next level. So instead of just casting local Phoenix people, go out there and cast an actual Hollywood actor, and he was able to get Tom Sizemore to agree to do it, and so that's how that came about. And again, I was cast as one of the barflies. There was a kind of, I think we called like the North End Boys or something. It was like four guys that hung out at the north end of the bar, just chopped it up and shot the shit. So I think I can't remember I can't remember what my role was. I think it was like I was supposed to be a real estate guy or something like that. But anyway, it wasn't particularly important. I don't think it ever actually was mentioned in the film. But yeah,
Well, hold on.
so it was
I
fun.
think you tried real estate for a while, so clearly
Oh,
there's a connection
oh
here.
yeah. Oh yeah, I might have made the part up about the real estate. Who knows? One of us was a real estate broker, but whatever. The main thing was I was a drunk, which actually was what I ended up being in a lot of Travis's films. I don't know if he just saw that in me or what, which is funny because of course in real life I'm practically a teetotaler. But yeah. But in any case, yeah. So that was the story of how I got to work with Tom Sizemore. So
I'm scanning through the cast and I'm realizing, okay, Peter Bogdanovich is in here, and
yeah.
also John Grease, who I know most recently from the White Lotus.
Oh, I didn't realize was he in season two?
He's in both seasons, actually.
Oh,
I think
really?
he appears toward the end of the first season, I think,
Okay.
and then he
I
shows up again, season two.
I
Yeah,
haven't watched the end of the first season, so that would explain why I didn't see him yet. But yeah, no, and I mean he's probably most famous for playing Uncle Rico and Napoleon Dynamite. I think that's
sure, sure.
his most known role, but obviously he's been in a lot of different things over the years, and he was actually a really great guy, a really fun to work with. I was able to work. He was in I was in a scene with him as well, and yeah, he was real nice and a pretty generous actor.
Did Travis or tell you, or did you ask him about like what the process was to reach out to some of these other folks? I mean, is it just a matter of like reaching out to their agents? Is it just a matter of asking and seeing if they're interested, or?
Yeah, you definitely have to go through their agents. I mean, you're not getting direct contact with any of these guys. Um, and I mean, I don't know. I didn't really talk to him about the process in any detail. Um, eh, so I don't know. I can't really speak to it very much, but my general impression is, if you have the right dollar figure that you can there's at least certain actors that will be willing to do it right, and you've probably seen this with various actors who are appearing in quite a few direct to streaming, or in the old days direct to DVD type of films, even though they're somewhat name actors. I think the most recent person that suddenly popped up in a lot of the stuff is Bruce Willis, who's been in like a dozen of these things, and there's
Mm-hmm.
been that apparently we've is later came out that his had some has a health condition, and it was more of maybe trying to set his family up since he was going to be unable to act for much longer due to his health condition. But anyway, other people maybe do it for other reasons. Nicolas Cage, famously has appeared in a lot of direct. Not to say that Durants is this category, but clearly, it's not just about the project quality for all these actors. And another one that you've seen a lot is Eric Roberts. Over the years has appeared in quite a few things. So yeah, and Sizemore I think kind of fell into that camp. Of course, Sizemore himself famously fell into hard times with substance abuse, and was even incarcerated for a while. And I mean, all this was pretty recently has been talked about since he recently passed away. R.I.P. Tom Sizemore, but yeah, and I think that he maybe was not in the best financial shape, and obviously not because of some of those problems, not like the most in-demand guy in Hollywood anymore. So if these more independent filmmakers were looking for a name and were able to pony up the cash, then he was available. So
Yeah, that reminds me of a time a friend of mine and I were. Uh, this is before the website Cameo. Do you know the website Cameo?
yes, I'm familiar with it.
The idea is, you can like pay a celebrity to record a message for a significant other, a friend, or a joke or whatever. And I feel like there was some website that was like that. And one time we looked up what it would cost to like book Lou Ferrigno, and
Hmm.
it was like a lot less than I would expect. And kind of in reflection, I was like, well, whatever. This was like 2014, so I don't know. Like you said, it's easy to forget I think that these are just regular people that need to work for a living, and then there's only one Tom Hanks, and people, very few people that operate that level, and Tom Cruise, and people of that sort of stature that have kind of lifelong careers, and a lot of people work in just kind of regular stuff. Or like over the holidays, my wife Paula and I, we were watching a bunch of Hallmark movies, right? And you sort of have a stable of people that are kind of associated with that, or the Hallmark Channel, whatever. And it's interesting because I think of like Annie McDowell. I think she was on a show for a while, or she'll be in some of those movies. And on the one hand, I'm like, oh, I've seen her in some like kind of bigger stuff. And then I also think, it might actually be kind of nice to fall into that as a career toward the end. You probably got like a steady stream of work. It's interesting. You might work with the similar people all the time, kind of get a little community going. But it's interesting to think of that as opposed to the big blockbuster actors, as just like, hey, this is just what they do for a living. Like, I got to
Oh
work, you
yeah.
got to work.
Yeah, I mean, most actors are in fact working actors, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, even people you may have seen in other things, right? If they're not a really big name, or even if they were once a big name, but they're not, again, Hollywood's not beating a path to their door anymore, then yeah, I mean, they're working for a living just like anyone else. And while there can be, sometimes big money in in film, it's not the most steady work, right? So it's not something where you're getting a paycheck every 2 weeks. So that money's got to last, right? You get a role and maybe you make, 100 grand or something, and that seems like pretty good for, say a 30-day shoot or something. But when's your next job coming along, right? You got to make that last. And of course, especially if you're living in LA, it's not known as the most inexpensive town in the world to live in. And so, so yeah, so all these things make it to where many people are living, I think, effectively, job to job, gig to gig, just like many other people in the American economy, right? So, which yeah, does surprise people sometimes, but I think that's more common than not, right? They're very, like you say, as you say, there are very few Tom Hanks.
Well, and you mentioned Hollywood. I mean, it's certainly not no shortage of competition. There's plenty of people who, you know, you're never going to hear of. They try it out. They give it their shot, and there's like 1,000 other people trying to do the same thing. And yeah, it's like anything else, I guess. Yeah, most of us will
Oh yeah,
never be known. Our names will be forgotten to history in no time. So
yeah, that's certainly a pleasant note to to hit, but I guess that's in line with your whole, you know, the whole theme of your new blog and podcast that we're doing this for, right? I mean, that's part of the struggle, right? Is you're out here to make something, some kind of a legacy, but you're still grappling with the immensity of the universe, and you're placing it in the fact that that legacy is likely to be, you know, quickly forgotten, almost regardless of how successful it is.
yeah, or in my case, never known in the first place, which is perfectly fine. It's yeah, I mean that is definitely a big theme. Is people that choose to do it anyway or give it a shot, um, or like in my case, I've been very fortunate that my sort of 9 to 5 career goes well enough and it has steady enough hours and predictable enough that I can kind of pick up stuff as I have time. Even projects that span months or years, I can kind of chip away at. And yeah, it's just a very different kind of way of approaching it. It's I guess it's what I've decided I'm comfortable with. So, you mentioned Eric Roberts. It made me think of Best of the Best. Great, great '80s, late '80s martial arts movie.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. It's one of the classics. Um, Yeah. So anyway, I think, I mean that does sort of open the door though to something I wanted to talk about, if you don't mind, which is just, what, um, I mean, I have read the initial entry in this blog series and of course this is a companion podcast for, and reading through it, I would have to say I was a little surprised to learn that there was a level of, I guess, I don't know what the word choice is here precisely, but maybe vulnerability or even insecurity around like the projects that you have created or are continuing to work on and create, that I didn't realize was there. I didn't realize that you were kind of so, um, or at least what I got from the blog was that you were so unsure of whether it was even worth it, which is kind of what I drew from that. Am I reading the right thing into that, or?
Hmm. Kind of, yeah. Whether it was even worth it. I mean, that is the eternal question. I love the staring into the void humor. Yeah, there's some vulnerability. I think there. I'm kind of reaching a phase in my life where I'm asking a lot of questions about, not exactly legacy. I don't know. That feels like too big a word almost for it, but um, I think of something you told me about 7 hours once that you would have, you'd love for it to be a huge hit or whatever, but also at the end of the day, you wanted people to see it. That was your goal. You want people to see the film, and I think, I was working on game projects and stuff when you and I met, here and there as I had time, and I, just like you've had an interest in film your whole life, I've had an interest in making video games, and that's the main sort of thing I do when I have time. But um, I think, I don't know. There's a vulnerability because I think I've fallen into a few communities of people that are similar, that are trying out there, and there's lots of YouTube channels and even courses and stuff you can buy, whatever, like learn to be a game developer. And they all sell the vision really hard because, the people selling the courses, for example, are trying to sell a product, and I get it. But there's this huge swath of people who are trying it, even taking it pretty seriously, or at least as seriously as they can, and yet, um, there's like this enormity of games that are coming out. It's something like a couple thousand new games every week if you include everything on Steam, all the platforms. And that's just like the major platforms people know about, but then like free indie games on the web, itch.io, places like that. And there's just like such a floodgate of things. It's kind of like all the new streaming shows are out all the time.
Right.
It's
Yeah, how do you compete in the marketplace where there's a fire hose of content?
yeah,
Always, just trying to get everyone, why would anyone ever play your game, right? When they
exactly.
could play one of these other, millions of games, many of which have, more resources than you do to make a game. I think, I mean, yeah, obviously it's the exact same. I think in any creative endeavor, right? Whether you're a musician, why would someone listen to your band? Why would someone listen? In my case, of course, why would someone watch your film? And it's certainly a good question, and it's one I've pondered myself. But if this makes you feel any more optimistic about it, I will say, one thing again I was very surprised about is the number of people who have watched 7 Hours in Heaven. Right, this is a film which, you know, none of the actors in it, while they're all, I think, very talented actors, none of them were names. Certainly, when the film was made. Since then, a couple of them have gone to work in Hollywood, and the one who's had the most success is a guy named Mark Grossman, who is now on The Young and the Restless in a very featured role on that show. And so I think there's some people who've discovered it. I mean, I know there's some people who've discovered it because they're fans of his from Young and the Restless, and then they've sort of just sought out his the rest of his catalog and came across the film that way. But even before he was casting on The Restless, there there were a lot of people that were actually finding the film. When I say a lot, obviously not relative to, a Hollywood blockbuster, of course. You know, more people, you know, probably go in the city of Los Angeles or something to see uh, a Hollywood blockbuster in one day than have seen my film total. But based on the numbers that I have access to in terms of streaming views and things of that nature on Amazon, um, I've been able to calculate that, roughly, 50,000 plus people have watched the film. And, quite frankly, that's a pretty stunning number. Again, while that's obviously very small potatoes compared to, again, any kind of Hollywood blockbuster. I mean, this is a film that why would anyone watch it, right? That if you didn't know me or know someone who was involved with the film, when you have so much other content, a never-ending, again, deluge of it, starring people you have heard of, like name actors or name, people, directors who you've maybe seen do other things. All these kinds of things are being pushed by, big streaming services, whereas this is just a film that, is available on Amazon. But how are people even stumbling across it? How are they finding it? Is the algorithm recommending it based on the things they've seen? I assume that must be happening some. um but yet somehow, some way, there are still people out there that are coming across it, and they continue to. I mean, because again, I see the numbers, and even every month there's still new people that come. And I mean, I'm assuming they're new people. There's no way for me to actually know that, but I can't imagine the same people just keep, renting the movie month after month. It'd be very odd. So presumably
You
new
got yourself a
people,
super fan, someone's
yeah,
just out there
exactly.
streaming it every single month,
Yeah,
or playing it in a bar somewhere,
yeah.
just on repeat.
Yeah. I mean, that'd be fun, but anyway, so yeah, so presumably new people just keep discovering it, um, and yeah, even with no promotion, no marketing. I mean, um, no no pushing of it by anybody. I mean, like this is about the most marketing that we get is something like this where I'm mentioning on a podcast, and hopefully a few people listening to this will have an interest and decide to seek it out and see what it's all about. But yeah, but so I guess that's my point is in this great wide world with 8 billion people in it, like somehow people do find stuff even when it's even when there's really no reason for them to, even when there's no marketing behind it, even when there's no names attached to it that people would necessarily know or anything. They still find stuff and still somehow dedicate an hour and a half of their lives, in my case, to check it out. So I think there's a reason to be optimistic that that there's just enough people in the world to find anything, no matter how niche.
Yeah, and I think it certainly helps, just to tell people about it. With games, I feel like it's relatively straightforward because so many people will try your game for 2 minutes, you know,
Hmm.
um, and it's relatively straightforward to publish a lot of games just on the web for free. You don't really need a platform; you just need a website for them to go to, and as long as you're designing a game that works well in that way, and someone can sit down at a computer and play it, I think there's a pretty good audience there. But to kind of go back to the story about, I remember you just saying like you want people to see it, and the kind of the vulnerability you were asking about. I think I decided a couple of years ago that regardless of whether anybody ever plays any of the games I make or care, I want to be able to look back and say I was somebody who um, built a game I was proud of, that was of a reasonable size, and that I finished it. And that kind of became the goal to me, and started shifting my perspective a little bit away from, I don't know, seeing a bunch of statistics about how how many people are playing the game and what kind of reach it's getting, whatever. Which for me is a total trap. I have to turn my attention away from that stuff because then it starts very quickly altering what I'm putting into the game.
Hmm.
Because game development starts, it can start to turn into this like, okay, how do I make this chart go in the direction I want it to?
Yeah, I completely understand. I'm very much a proponent of the driving force behind any creative endeavor should be that I really want to see this out in the world, right? Even if not a single person other than me ever watches it or plays it or listens to it, whatever the thing is, like I just want this thing to be out in the world. I want to see the vision that I have in my head realized as an object of art in the world. And so if that is the driving force, then then again, that's something that you can achieve, and that's something that everything else then becomes gravy, right? I mean, it's wonderful, obviously, if other people, consume it, or and if you even get paid for it. I mean, these are all wonderful things, but they're not the reason you did it in the first place. Then I think you certainly can set yourself up for success in a way that if those other things are the reason to do it, then not only are you setting yourself up for likely failure, um, based on those metrics, but also, like as you said, it sort of can, I don't want to say corrupt, but certainly shape the thing to be something that is not so much driven by you, um, and in your vision, in your creative process, but almost what you're doing for others, or what, or even hypothetical others that you think are out there or might be, be the people. So I don't know. I guess I mean, it's a very cliche thing to say, but I guess I believe in doing creative endeavors for yourself, um, first and foremost.
Yeah, I think for a long time I wanted to be known for whatever creative stuff I was doing. Um, then the internet came along, and it was like, yeah, that's not really going to happen. Here comes everybody, kind of thing. Um, and I don't know. Yeah, I struggled with that for a long time. Uh, that one of the big drivers was to not just have done the thing, but to do it, and people were like, "Oh, I know that person's name." So yeah. Hmm.
One thing you said, about being at a point in your life, and thinking about, again, you hesitate to use the word legacy, but I think there was sort of a hint of that around it. It made me think of something which, I'll just go ahead and say, and maybe if this is digging too deep psychologically, feel free to cut this out. Obviously, you're in charge of the recordings here. Um,
I'm recording
uh,
this. Oh
well,
shit.
I mean, you may not be. Maybe we're just hanging out, having a conversation, which is either way is good with me. Uh, but uh, but I was thinking about, the fact that, you don't have children. Obviously, I do, and obviously, for any person that does have children, they are just inherently part of your legacy, right? Whatever else you do, uh, you have this thing that you put out into the world that is, has sort of part of you in it, literally in terms of your DNA, but obviously, things you've potentially imbued into children in terms of values, and um and teachings and other things like that, and this other human being, right, that's out there. And so that's, again, always going to be inherently part of your legacy, for good or ill. But, like, if you don't have children, like, I was I wonder if things like these sorts of creative endeavors, you know, are, in a sense, your children, right? Uh, if they sort of take the place of that in some sense. Anyway, I don't know if that's something that's crossed your mind at all, or it's something that you've ever considered, especially as you say, like, this point in your life, because of course you are at a point in your life where, presumably, children are no longer on the table as an option. Although it's never too late, but some people have children in their 80s and 90s, even, especially if you're a man. The door never really closes, but 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 there is a point where, as a practical matter, it becomes, less appealing, certainly. So, and I
Hmm.
think you've
Hmm.
kind of, reached that threshold, whether you're thought about it consciously or not. So, any thoughts on that?
Hmm. I don't know. I don't. Hmm. I think I'm become more and more comfortable with the idea that I'll simply disappear at some point.
Hmm.
There's like a comfort in the fading away, I think. Um, yeah. One thing I will say, and I don't know if this ties into what any part of what you may be talking about there in terms of like the creative endeavor being a proxy for children in a sense, is I do know that I was super defensive and especially in my 20s, really not open to collaborators. I
Hmm.
When I was working on game ideas back then, and I think this is a big reason why I didn't get very far with most of them, is that I wouldn't accept help from other people because I saw their creative input as a threat to whatever idea I had. And now I see it very differently. Like I'm working with Hunter on music and a pixel artist in Italy for art. And I find it actually totally freeing in two ways. One, I don't have to do those things, which I'm not good at anyway. And two, their creative input actually inside this sort of like trusted circle of people that I'm bringing into the project makes I think makes the thing better. Like they bring in creative ideas I never would have thought of, and now I'm appreciative of that, and I try to be open to it and listen. Like is my idea so precious, or could it be made better by listening to these other people that have their own specialties and so yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that I mean that makes perfect sense to me. Obviously, filmmaking is inherently an incredibly collaborative medium. Obviously, you can't really make a film by yourself. I guess maybe Bo Burnham accepted. Um, but yeah, I mean it's typically something where even on a small set, small budget, indie film, right? You've still got several different people involved, in the process. Even if you are wearing a lot of hats, you've still got, different actors, and you typically are going to have somebody running sound, or so even if maybe you're running the camera, but if not, you've got somebody that's doing camera. You've got someone's doing lighting, right? You've got all these different people involved, on a small film, and you really do have to you have to collaborate. You have to work together and find a way to take all these different talents and really draw them into a cohesive whole. And that's part of the beauty of it. I mean, that's one of the things that I love about filmmaking, is that it's it doesn't matter. You're only as sort of as strong as your weakest link, right? If you have great actors, great camera work, amazing lighting, everything, but the script sucks, then the film's no good, right? So, and again, you can substitute any one of those elements. Like it doesn't matter. You have the best writing in the world. If your actors can't deliver the lines convincingly, then it doesn't matter. So, and it will torpedo the film. So I think that's that level of having to get everybody, to buy in, and everybody to do their job uh, effectively, and to make something work, to have, as I say, no weak links, is the beauty of the art of filmmaking to me. Um, so I certainly can understand where you would, get a charge out of working with some of these other collaborators and finding that satisfying creatively.
Yeah, I think I also have a tendency to be a people pleaser a lot of times, and
Mm,
so maybe another facet to that is that um, I've shied away in the past from exposing an idea too early because if I start to get some positive reinforcement or interest, it's like that chart I talked about earlier. It starts to shape things, and I'm more aware of it now. It's like, oh, I'm doing that thing where this one person expresses interest, and I'm like starting to give them quite a large percentage of my attention, at least for a short period. And it's weird. And I don't just mean like for a few minutes or a few emails or whatever. I mean like I might talk to somebody or keep this person in mind for the next month or two when I'm thinking about working on some feature or the other. And it's weird. It's something I've had to learn to balance. I want that creative input. I want to know what people are interested in, but also I need to get a project far enough along before I'm ready to, I don't know, sort of just ask the crowd what they think.
Mm-hmm.
I want to kind of get it in place enough so it's like, yeah, there's a core here, there's a clear theme, clear idea. I can tell a clear story about what this is about, what's important to me about it, and then invite people in. And that's independent of working with just a couple of close collaborators. I'm talking about like posting about it online and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, yeah, definitely, doing um game development, as you know, as you do, is a very different beast, obviously in a number of ways, but in terms of what we're talking about with collaboration, I can see that while you are able to have some level of collaboration, like you said, with a pixel artist or something like that, so much of the actual producing of the product, right, is you sitting alone in a room in front of a computer, typing away, like generating code. Um, and and that's very different from filmmaking, right? Where it's again, at least when you're actually, doing the principal photography, you're by nature working with a bunch of people. It's a very social situation, and a very like fluid collaboration with a bunch of different people, all working in concert. Um, and that's very different. Um, that actual production stage, and again, I'm sure that the game development probably suits your personality better than running a film set would, but whereas vice versa for me. But I do think that that's again a different kind of collaboration. And I think the production process for you feels like it'd be more akin to the writing of the screenplay, for me, where it's just you and the computer for a lot of the time.
Yeah, probably. I think also think of individual players, not like players as a group. I think of like doing this many hours of just being by myself working on something, and I think about the other person that's going to be on the other side, potentially playing it on their own, and it's their own
Hmm.
kind of unique experience. Maybe like a reader of a book or something. I don't know.
Hmm.
Um, the sort of communication channel across the um, I don't know, across the universe or whatever. So so when you so after you'd done 7 hours in heaven,
Hmm.
and at some point you had to uh, you couldn't just spend 50% of your time on filmmaking. You started to have kids again, you got remarried. What was that shift back to those other priorities like?
Well, I would say that it was, it wasn't that difficult overall. I wouldn't say I struggled overly with it, while of course there's a part of me that, wishes I could be doing films 100% of the time. And certainly if I was independently wealthy, that is how I would choose to spend my time. This is a situation where I never even thought I would have the opportunity to do something like making a feature film, right? So the fact that I got the opportunity to do it at all, the fact that I got that window, um, I was very grateful, I think, just to have that time, and to be able to produce as much as I did in that time, and be involved with as many films as I was, whether it's again acting or directing, shorts, the feature, etc. Um, so I think I had a lot of gratitude for the time, which helped. And also I'm just generally a good person at compartmentalizing. So I'm typically able to go, okay, like now that thing has to go into a box and go up on the shelf, and now we're onto this other thing, and we're not going to think about that thing, until we can take it back down from the shelf again. Which not everyone is able to do that effectively, but that's always been something that has come naturally to me, which is which I find to be helpful in a lot of situations in life. Some people, uh, other people have sometimes argued that maybe it's not 100% psychologically healthy all the time, but you know, there's pros and cons to everything, I suppose. Um, but yeah, but in this case, I feel like it was helpful for me to be able to just make that shift and say, okay, it's going to go up on the shelf, and someday it'll come back down. And speaking of that, like it's something I have been able to take down somewhat recently, more not to the level that I was doing, during that window. But I is something that I've told you about, of course, is I've made another feature recently, which is a documentary feature. First time I've I've done well, I shouldn't say I've done one other short form doc, but anyway, haven't done that much in the documentary space, but did this documentary feature. This is not publicly available. This is a sort of very limited audience for this film, because of course it is about the life of my grandmother, who is 90 years old and still going strong at the moment, and has had a pretty extraordinary life, and touched a lot of people's hearts along the way. And so I wanted to document that, and was able to produce this film, which is a 90-minute long feature film, um, that chronicles her life, and was able to present that to her and our sort of all family and friends um, on her 90th birthday. So yeah, so that's one example, and there's been like I said, a few other things at the margins, but that's sort of been so again, it's like it's always there. Filmmaking is always in my blood, in my heart, however you want to phrase it, and when the opportunities present themselves, I'll be ready to take them. So, or take advantage of them.
Do you, when you were trying to tell that story about your grandmother, I mean, okay, so 90 minutes, 90 years, I mean, not a lot of time to cover certain areas,
Sure.
perhaps very different than, say, 7 hours, where, I mean, it's in the title. It's, a period of time that's relatively short. You're telling a focus story about a few characters. Uh, do you see any contrast there? Am I just picking at a like kind of, sort of an arbitrary detail, or do you feel like the filmmaking process of telling those two different scales of story feel really different? Or
Oh yeah, I mean it's certainly a challenge anytime you're dealing with a wide span of time in a film, which is of course limited. Even a long film, right, like a 3-hour epic or something, is typically telling a very sprawling story with dozens of characters. It often takes place over many many years, or sometimes even decades, right? And so yeah, so how do you do that in such a compressed time frame and do it effectively? That's one of the certainly one of the challenges of any kind of film like that. And this was no exception. So yeah, I mean, really, the way I approached the this particular story was um, maybe a predictable way of doing it, but I think was suited for the material, which is that everyone's life, uh, or most people's lives, I should say, tend to have sort of similar milestones or tent poles, right? Uh, that you can kind of build around, and those are things like, their childhood, like how they grew up, and then their marriage, if they were married, their having of children, if they had children, their career, um, their, you know, friends that they made, their close friends, their maybe there's a dimension in terms of a hobby, or maybe a community dimension, like their involvement with the church, things like that. And then, of course, grandchildren and the continuing legacy, right? So these sorts of temples tend to be very similar, and there's something that you kind of can even see in photos, right? If you look at a photo album of somebody's life, this especially, back in the days when we actually had physical photos, right? I don't know what it would look like now if you're looking at somebody's, I don't know, iPhoto roll or something, but I guess iPhoto, I'm dating myself. iPhoto's dead, right? It's
Yeah.
just photos now. But anyway, Apple Photos roll or whatever it is, it might be a different story in the time of cell phones. But, in the old days, right? Like with if you're looking at physical album, you'll kind of notice there are big jumps and big gaps, like, right? Like you'll see pictures of the person as a little kid typically, and then you'll see some pictures of their wedding. And then suddenly so they start disappearing from the pictures. You start seeing pictures of their kids, right? If they're there, they're usually as a secondary person. A lot of times they're holding the camera, but if they are, the spouse is holding the camera and they're holding the children, things like that. And then there's usually like a pretty big, then you might see a few things. Maybe they got an award for some thing in their career or something like that. Maybe there's a few pictures of some social occasion, but usually there's a pretty big jump until you get to grandchildren again. Rare. So again, I think these are just sort of natural markers in the life of most people, and that was what I chose to build it around, was those kinds of events, and just use that as rather than trying to exhaustively chronicle each year, for example, which would have been probably both boring and way too long. So
Or way too short in a certain way, I guess. Yeah. Not enough
yeah,
time.
but
Huh.
yeah, I mean the structure of the film really, I mean, it was using those temples, but then interspersing, right, instead of just telling that story, because that was like her story, sort of her side of her story was telling through those, and a series of really interviews I did with her, and then of course blending things like photographs and some video and things like that into it. But the other side of the story is like how she has impacted all the people in her life, right, and all the effect she's had in this 90 years, all on all the different family members and friends and different people whose hearts she's touched, and so that was the other important side of the story to tell. And so there are uh, a bunch interspersed between her telling her story. There are all the different people telling the story of her impact on their lives in all these different ways. So that's how I ended up structuring it, which I think was effective. I was happy with the final result, and I think it did justice to her life and her legacy, which was the goal.
Which one of your kids is going to do the same for you, do you think?
Yeah, well, if only I could be so lucky. We'll see.
My,
Uh,
Meanwhile, I've tried to curtail my influence already so that it's sort of dwindling toward an infinitesimally small point until snuffed out and finally done with the daily grind, as one would say.
yeah. Well, I think, to me, everybody um, s- is able to express their appreciation and gratitude in their own way, right? And that happens to be the way that I had available to me, with my skill set and my experience. That was my love letter that I was able to write. So,
Hmm. That's a very
but
cool
lots of other
thing.
people have their own different, you know, methods. But yeah, thank you. I was again, I was pleased that we were able to do it. It was, again, certainly like any feature length film project, was very challenging and tough to pull all the different pieces together, um, but it was worthwhile for sure.
So, what kind of creative stuff are you doing these days? I think you hinted that you're starting to get a little bit more time again.
Yeah. Well, it's yeah, it's funny you should ask. So I am, I would say, in the very early stages of pre-production on narrative feature. Um, I don't know if it's going to actually amount to anything or not at this point. I am collaborating with my younger brother, and when I say younger, I mean much younger. I have a brother that came from my dad's second marriage, so technically half brother, um, who is 20 years younger than me, and has recently graduated film school, and so um, and he actually worked as the editor on the documentary project that we were just speaking about, and I had a really good experience collaborating with him on that. So we kind of coming out of that came the idea that maybe we should collaborate again, and so we started kicking around some ideas for a feature film, and now we're in the outlining stage on that. So um, it may or may not come to fruition. Obviously, it's a lot of times things get to these stages and you can't quite crack the story, or maybe the screenplay starts getting written, but you can't figure out the third act or whatever. There's lots of things that can go wrong along the way, um, but potentially, this would be my next big project if we can get a script that we're passionate about out of this process.
So it'd be you and your younger brother
Yes.
primarily getting that going, and then when would
Yeah,
you know? I mean, you'd have to do a first, second draft of the script, I presume. But what's the very next step after that? Do you think, or typically?
Yeah, well, so if yeah, the definitely getting to a script that we love, that we're passionate about, is the first milestone, right? And if we have that, then it becomes okay. Now we can really like go into pre-production on the rest of the film. And so yeah, the next steps, I mean, these things you would kind of start doing in concert, but um would be things like location scouting, trying to figure out like where we're going to shoot this thing, and having to secure locations, if there's things like, for example, you need a restaurant, right? We can't build a restaurant set or anything, so we got to find a real restaurant that's willing to let us shoot there, and negotiate with them if there's any compensation needed or things of that nature. Um so that's one big piece. Obviously, casting is a another big piece. We'd have to start holding auditions, or maybe offering some actors outright if there's people that I've worked with before that I feel really confident in. But yeah, but typically holding auditions and um, figuring out who the right people are. There's obviously recruiting a crew is another big one. Finding who's going to fill all the different crew roles that are needed, and figuring out the compensation there, and all that stuff. Um, so yeah, those are sort of the next big steps. Once you start, some of these start falling into place, you start knowing people's availability and schedule, things like that. You can start building out the actual shooting schedule, and you know, go from there. I mean, it's like I say, it's project management at that stage, really. It's if you've ever been a project manager of any kind, a lot of stuff will become familiar in terms of a lot of logistics.
Yeah, keeping things moving, making sure people have what they need, know basically what the direction you're all heading collectively, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, coordinating a lot of different people's schedules, coordinating, their efforts, all that stuff. Timing things out properly. Um, yeah, it's just all, again, those are not necessarily the sexy part of filmmaking, but incredibly important. You can't really make a film without it. Certainly, probably will be disastrous when you get to set if you haven't done a good job with those things. So,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, any complex project of any kind is uh, the bulk of it is just the stuff that has to get done.
right.
Yeah.
Yep, slogging through the mud.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So if you were to look forward, say, I don't know, 50 years. You might still be alive in 50 years. Um, let's say
Not out of the question.
50 years. Okay, ignoring things like the singularity, which we've also in our
Right.
previous,
Ignoring the fact that I'll most likely be a pile of paper clips by then, but yes.
if you put a sort of a drop in the water of history, right, and it's your life. What if you could choose a few places it might go? What do you think? Where do you think would be interesting?
What do you think? What do I think would be interesting for my life, or where do I think it's likely to go?
Oh, I'd say interesting in terms of like where you might end up, and also say 40, 50 years after your death. Your family, your children, your grandchildren, thinking about you.
Wow, that's a big question. Uh, yeah, I mean, and you're saying like a, sort of a realistic scenario where I could see not necessarily just some dream scenario where I like win the lottery or something, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, boy, yeah. I mean, well, I definitely foresee, making more films. I mean, you know, would I definitely hope that I'm in good health, once I hit retirement age, or that I'm able to retire even, potentially earlier than traditional retirement age. So which, so depending on, hopefully, things are financially sound enough that that is a possibility. I don't know, when that will be exactly, but anyway, but early enough, and at that point, I certainly, my kids will all be, out of the house, or off, either at least in college, if not, into the workforce and onto their lives in that regard. Hopefully, all, successfully independent human beings, and yeah, I mean, I really would like to fully throw myself into filmmaking at that point. I mean, that's basically my plan. Whether it will come to fruition or not, we will see. But um, and and yeah, so I definitely foresee myself making a lot more films. Again, not that I'm not going to make films in the interim, but would love to get to a true, almost full-time schedule. Um, don't then again, they don't have to be anything um, high budget or anything, and in fact, I presumably will be financing them myself for the most part. Um, but but again, just to be doing it, just to be doing the thing, and where that goes from there, who knows? I mean, I don't necessarily see that it ever going to a point where I'm able to work and make a living doing that, although that would be amazing. Um, and certainly not opposed to that if things somehow wind up in that direction, but that's not something that I foresee personally. Um, but again, it doesn't matter, right? Because for me, while yes, that would be amazing. The thing that would be amazing about it would just be the freedom that it allows me to make more films, right? Uh, if I was able to, for example, right now be paying all my bills with filmmaking, then that would just mean I could dedicate more time to filmmaking. So it's really the freedom that it affords, not the actual money itself, or any kind of fame or anything that is an end in and of itself, right? It's what it gets you. And in my case, what other thing I'm primarily after is freedom, um, freedom to pursue these things. So yeah, so if I have that already, then everything else is gravy. And so yeah, so doing that, hopefully I mean, it would be nice if my children had some interest in participating in these things. And I definitely do have some creativity. And my older children, as you know, of course, one of them is a talented composer, and I certainly foresee working with him on some of the films, and in that capacity. And yeah, there's definitely some other talent in my children. So if they really embrace it, then that would be fun. If not, that's fine too. Obviously, they have to have their own paths, and I'm happy for them to explore whatever that is. But yeah, so I don't know. I mean, that's obviously, I expect I will have grandchildren, given that I do have four children, and presumably I'll end up with some grandchildren out of that, and then that will will be another, big part of my life, I'm sure. Um, and then, yeah, after I'm gone, I mean, who knows, 50 years after I'm gone, I mean, gosh, like, it's, of course, I know you said ignore the singularity or whatever, but it's hard to even imagine what the world would be like, obviously, as we live through history in the present, right? Where, there's a new shocking AI development every single day, it seems like. It really does feel like we're on a bullet train to the future, and it's hard to uh, even get a grasp on what's happening day to day, much less what it's going to look like, 5 years from now. So to talk about 50 years from now or 100 years from now, after I'm gone, it's like, yeah, it's just almost inconceivable. But it certainly would be cool if somehow some of the things that I've made, some of the films I've made, are still being watched by somebody. If there's any interest there, even if it's just like my great grandchildren or whatever. I mean, that would be pretty cool. But who knows? I guess it won't. I guess it won't matter to me at that point. So
You'll be too busy.
I'll be with you in the void. So
Yeah, you'll be too busy holding stacks of paper together as a stack of paper clips yourself.
yeah, exactly. I'll be achieving my true purpose as a perfectly shaped instrument of attachment.
So somewhere, I think what you're saying is somewhere in between the Star Trek Future of Abundance and paper clips and total annihilation. Somewhere there would be fine with you.
Yeah, yeah. So we can just split the difference there. I think we'll be all right.
Well, thanks for spending this time with me, Kyle. So, Kyle Gerkin.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, good friend of mine. We've known each other, like you said, since the early 2000s, so over 20 years now, I think, since we started working together.
Yeah, that's crazy to think about, but you're right. It has been.
Yeah, close to 50% of our lives, I think, which is also kind of nuts. But yeah, appreciate it, and go check out 7 Hours in Heaven. Get those numbers up.
Yeah, good luck with all your continuing endeavors, including, of course, this newest one, with the blog and the podcast. I certainly will be following it, and I hope everything goes well, and you get what you're looking for out of it.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. I appreciate it, man. Have a good night. And there we have it. My interview with my good friend, Kyle Gerkin. For anyone listening out there, I just wanted to say thanks for tuning in. Hope you found the show entertaining, and I will see you next time.